Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the cozy cafe where Sarah sipped her latte, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. Life had always seemed so predictable, so stable, but lately, that stability felt more like a cage. Her marriage to Mark had been good, not great, but good. They shared a home, routines, and dreams that once felt aligned. Yet, something was missing, a spark she hadn't felt in years. It was during one of her solo escapes to this cafe that she met Ethan. He was seated at a corner table, his presence magnetic. Dressed in a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, he was deeply engrossed in his laptop. His features were sharp, his dark eyes full of intensity, and his smile, when it finally came, was devastatingly charming. Sarah's gaze lingered a moment too long, and when he looked up, their eyes met. She quickly looked away, her heart pounding. She chastised herself for the flutter of excitement she felt. But fate, it seemed, had plans. "Excuse me," Ethan said, approaching her table a few minutes later. His voice was smooth, confident. "I couldn't help but notice you seem like someone who enjoys a good book. I'm looking for recommendations." Sarah blinked, surprised. "Oh, sure. What kind of books do you like?" "Anything that's written with passion," he said, his gaze holding hers a little too long. From that moment, their connection grew. At first, it was innocent, small conversations about books, life, and hobbies. They would run into each other at the cafe more often, and each time, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Ethan was divorced, an architect who had recently moved to the city. He was different from anyone Sarah had ever known. Spontaneous, adventurous, and unapologetically honest about what he wanted from life. For weeks, Sarah convinced herself that these interactions were harmless. But deep down, she knew the truth. She felt alive when she was with Ethan, in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her laughter came easily, her heart raced, and she began to crave his presence. One rainy afternoon, their dynamic shifted. Sarah had finished her errands early and decided to stop by the cafe. She found Ethan sitting at their usual spot, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. As they talked, the rain intensified, and Ethan suggested they wait it out at his nearby apartment. Sarah hesitated but found herself agreeing. His apartment was modern yet cozy, filled with personal touches that spoke of his creative mind. They talked over coffee, the atmosphere charged with an unspoken tension. "Sarah," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence, "I know we've been dancing around this, but I need to say it. I'm drawn to you in a way I can't ignore." Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to push him away and walk out. But instead, she whispered, "I feel the same way." That moment marked the beginning of their affair. It was reckless and passionate, filled with stolen moments and whispered confessions. They met whenever they could, finding solace in each other's arms. Sarah felt alive in ways she hadn't in years, but guilt lingered at the edges of her happiness. Mark, oblivious to the turmoil in Sarah's heart, continued his routines. He was a good husband, kind, dependable, and hardworking, but his focus on work often left little time for emotional connection. Sarah found herself torn between the stability of her marriage and the intoxicating allure of Ethan. As the weeks turned into months, the affair became harder to conceal. Sarah grew distant at home, her mind constantly drifting to Ethan. Mark began to notice the changes. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening, his eyes filled with concern. "You've been so distracted lately." "I'm fine," Sarah lied, forcing a smile. "Just work stress." But the weight of her deception grew heavier each day. She knew she couldn't continue living a double life, but the thought of losing Ethan was unbearable. One evening, as she lay in bed beside Mark, Sarah made a decision. She needed to confront her feelings and make a choice. The next day, she met Ethan at their favorite park, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the trees. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, "I can't keep doing this. I'm torn between you and my marriage, and it's tearing me apart." Ethan took her hands in his eyes searching hers. "I don't want to make things harder for you, Sarah, but I love you, and I can't pretend otherwise. I want you to be happy, whatever that means." Tears streamed down her face as she realized the depth of his feelings. She had never felt so loved. Yet the thought of breaking her marriage weighed heavily on her conscience. In the days that followed, Sarah withdrew from both Ethan and Mark, needing time to reflect. She revisited the memories of her marriage, the good times and the bad. She thought about the person she had become with Ethan, the way he had awakened a part of her she thought was lost. Finally, after weeks of soul-searching, Sarah sat down with Mark. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her heart. Mark looked at her, his expression a mix of apprehension and concern. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I haven't been honest with you. I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Mark's face fell, his eyes filled with pain. "Why, Sarah? Was I not enough?" "It's not about you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I felt lost for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you. I'm so sorry." Mark sat in silence, processing her words. Finally, he spoke. "I wish you had come to me first. We could have worked through this together. But if you're not happy, I won't force you to stay." Their separation was painful but amicable, marked by mutual respect despite the heartbreak. Sarah moved out, unsure of what the future held. Ethan stood by her side, his love unwavering. Months later, as Sarah stood in Ethan's apartment, watching him paint, she felt a sense of peace. Her journey had been messy and painful, but it had led her to a love that felt real and true. And for the first time in years, she felt free.